Hello and welcome to Melee's Turnwheel, the series that takes a retroactive look at the Fire Emblem series chapter by chapter. I'm your host, I'm Melee Kirby, and today we're taking it back to chapters 6, 7, and 8 of Fire Emblem, the Sacred Stones. Hope everyone's doing good today. I am trying to get this out. I would like to just kind of I'm keeping a good pace going. I'm hoping that I don't get burned out or anything, but I'm just going to keep doing this until I get tired of it, and then maybe I'll take a little bit of a longer break in between episodes. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm sitting here. I'm enjoying the process of recording these and editing these, and then playing the maps. So I might as well just keep going with that. Hopefully, I can. If I keep up this pace, I can definitely finish Sacred Stones a little bit ahead of schedule, which would be good. But I'm not gonna stake my claims on that. I'm still hoping to keep pace with the one game a year thing, which would get me there in December. But 3 episodes in the first month, isn't exactly, a bad pace. So we'll try to keep that going for as long as possible. 3 main episodes and then a couple of SSS, of course. But yeah, so today we're going to be looking at the rest of the game pre-route split. And I'm not going to be talking about the route split this episode. I'll get more into that later. I was expecting to. I was expecting to finish Chapter 8 and then talk a little bit about the route split, but I think I'm actually going to save that for the beginning of next episode. So we're just going to be talking about 6, 7, and 8 today. But before we get to any of those, we need to address the question from last time, which was, what was your favorite monster design in this game, I believe is what it was. I got one response, and it was from the email. So let me just pull that up real quick. So this response comes from Cephas. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Apologies if not. And they just sent a little message sort of expressing appreciation for the podcast, which I always love to read. I really appreciate when I get stuff like this. Makes it feel a little bit more worth it, to know that what I'm doing here is actually connecting with some people. And then they responded to the question. As for the most recent listener question, my favorite FE8 monster is the Bale due to the interesting etymology of their name and how cool the idea and visual of a spider using its front 4 legs as blades while still standing on its back 4 is. Yeah, so I actually didn't know anything about the name, about what the name was referencing. So after reading this, I did go and look into it a little bit, and it's really cool. A Bale is a type of demon that's described as having the body of a spider and then 3 different types of heads. It's really cool. Definitely go check out that Wikipedia article if you have some time. Honestly, and this kind of got me digging a little bit deeper into the rabbit hole of some of these names. A lot of the, obviously a lot of the monsters in these games are based on really obvious stuff like gargoyles, wights. These are all, most people know these just from pop culture. But I had no idea what a Gwilgi was, or a Gwilgi, which is the promoted version of the fucking dog. Apparently that's like a black omen of death. In a lot of cultures. Those things look fucking cool also. Some of these monster designs are just so goddamn cool. A Malduin... Actually, I forgot to look up Malduin. Let me see. This is all in the etymology section of the Fire Emblem Wiki as well. Malduin is derived from Malduin, a Christian hero from Celtic mythology who went on a great voyage and saw many monsters and magic of Celtic myths. So that kind of bucks the trend there a little bit, being based on a hero instead of a demon. But that's neat. I like that. So yeah, a lot of really good options here to choose from. By the way, one note, I was wrong about a couple things related to Gaiden. First of all, they have a lot more monster variety than I remember them having. They have Entombed and Revenants. They have Bone Walkers. I thought that those were the same, but they're separate in Gaiden. There's Liches. Which I believe, that's the promoted version of Bone Walker, I guess. But then there's Gargoyles, and then, of course, the Draco zombies. So I did forget about some of those. Some of those did come back in FE8 as well. I think... this is really tough. I'm not sure. I really like the colors on the Elder Bale, so that might be my answer. But there's also some really fucking cool other ones. I really like the Gwilgis, which are the I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but they're 3-headed hellhounds, which are super cool. Yeah, it's probably one of those. I think probably Elder Bale. The only real difference between Bale and Elder Bale is that the colors. They're the same in terms of like their animations and stuff, but the Elder Bale is like black with a green streak through it and like blood red. Honestly, it looks brighter than blood red. It's like crimson, like face and legs. So that's really cool. I really like the color scheme on that. So Cephas did actually ask about one other thing that I wanted to bring up. They asked about a Discord server, and honestly, it was really only a matter of time before this came up because I do talk about it a fair bit. I talk about it as being the source of where I get a few of my answers, and I also talk about it as like, you know, I talk about it with some of the people that I have on, since most of the guests I have on, well, all the guests I have on are friends from the same Discord server. So that's not like a public place that I can invite people to, unfortunately. Although if there was a point where I had enough people listening to the podcast and there was interest in a public server for people to come and hang out, I think that would be something I'm willing to do. I just wouldn't want to do it until I had more people who listen, because I don't know, I am kind of socially awkward, and like being alone in a Discord full of like 4 people who know me and I don't really know them very well. I don't know. It would be awkward for me, but I'm definitely willing to do it at some point if you know, this ever gets to, I don't know, I wouldn't need like a ton, you know, I'm thinking maybe like a few dozen people who regularly engage with the show, which I don't know if that'll ever happen, but if it does, that's the benchmark that I'll set for when it's time to maybe make a public Discord. But until then, unfortunately, that is not really a place that I can share with you all. So sorry for, you know, bringing it up a whole bunch. I know it's not something that you guys have access to. It just kind of enters my stream of consciousness a lot because it is where I engage with a lot of Fire Emblem conversation and a lot of people who I talk about the series with. Okay, so thanks for writing in, Cephas, and for next episode's, at this rate it is going to be next week's, for next episode's question, what I want to know is, I don't really have one that's, you know, connected to this episode in any way, so I'm going to ask something that's been on my mind a little bit recently. Who do you guys think is the worst unit in terms of gameplay in this game? Because I think there's a few contenders for that title. Usually, there's like a front runner, right? Like there's someone who's so obviously terrible, or at least like, you know, like maybe 2 possibly that you could argue for that bottom spot. Like in FE6, it's definitely either Sophia or Wendy. I would argue Wendy. In FE7, it's like maybe Nino or maybe Carla. I would argue it's actually, who would I argue there, huh? That's tough. It doesn't matter. I think probably Nino. I think probably Nino is the worst one. But in this game, there's like multiple contenders, I think. Like there's Naomi, there's Marissa, there's Ewan, there's possibly Amelia, depending on like whether you value her class, her access to Cavalier and Paladin, over the fact that Ewan gets access to like utility class and Summoner. Like, you know, there's a few viable answers here, I think, and I'm curious what you guys think, because I was really trying to decide who I thought it was, and I couldn't make up my mind. I think all of those 4 options that I just listed are like completely terrible, and contenders for the worst unit in the game. And maybe there's another one that I'm not even thinking of, but who knows? Yeah, I'm curious to see what you guys think. Go ahead and leave your answers at I'mAMeleeKirby on Twitter and Blue Sky, or email turnwellpodcast@gmail.com. I know that a few of you guys have not been getting well, I know I'm not giving you guys much chance to get answers in before recording the next episode. And I know like you guys probably expect a certain amount of time between episodes in which you can reply. And I'm sorry about that, but I've been on a roll and I haven't wanted to slow down. So yeah, apologies for that if you feel like you haven't been able to get your answers in. In fact, I do know that that Drano, one of the people who's written in the past, tried to get his answer in about I don't know what your gender is, tried to get their answer in about their first Fire Emblem game after I had already put out the last episode. So I unfortunately didn't get a chance to read that in the previous episode, although I will do so right now before we get into the next and before we get into the chapters for the episode. So in regards to the their first Fire Emblem game, Drano says, FE7, 2003, loved it right away. I was a dumb kid and was very bad at it. Very surprised when my Florina didn't come back in Chapter 4 because of the RPG convention where stopping for a night's rest equals full party heal. My first run petered out around Dragon's Gate. I probably kept losing, looked up the game facts, saw everyone saying Marcos was bad, decided I'd leaned on him too much, and must have soft-locked this run. Little did I know it was actually me who was bad. I was bad enough at the game that it took me several more runs to beat Elowood normal. I have loved the series ever since. Still not great at it, but can just about handle some of the easier hard modes these days. And that is a pretty relatable experience. I think starting with FE8 was probably my best bet because I think FE8's easier than FE7. I mean, I think that's pretty undisputable. I think there's no map in FE8 that comes close to like Cog of Destiny or Victory or Death, even on Elowood mode, right? Not even counting Hector hard mode. But anyway, so I don't think I had quite as hard of a time getting through my first playthrough. But I agree with, like, I'm in the same place now where it's like some of the easier hard modes are kind of where I'm at, and then anything harder than that, and I start to struggle a little bit. But past that, thank you for rating in. Sorry I didn't get a chance to get your answer last time. I will try my best to, if I know that an answer comes in a bit behind, I will try to read it in the next episode if I'm able to, but sometimes I might not. So anyway, that's all that I had, I think. So let's go ahead and get started with Chapter 6, which is called Victims of War. So if you recall, at the end of last episode, we had just finished up a chapter that took place from Ephraim's POV. But now we're back in Eirika's shoes, and obviously she doesn't have access to any of that information. So we're left to wonder about what happened to Ephraim. Is he okay? Did he make it out all right? What's going to happen to him next? But Eirika is continuing her march down to Grotto. In fact, now she's in Grotto, technically. Seraphu was at the border, and we finished that in Chapter 5. So we're now crossing the border into Grotto. Before you actually start this next map, I would recommend you stop by the shop that you have access to on the tile where Chapter 5 took place. There's some good items there. This is our first item shop that we've been given access to this game. So this is where we can buy tomes, heal staves, and vulneraries, and things of that nature. There are some goons who are set up to try to stop her, and one of them is talking to Reeve, who is one of the evil generals that we met a couple chapters ago in a cutscene. And they're talking a little bit about how they're going to stop Eirika. And Reeve wants to make sure that he's okay for the job. This guy that he set up, I don't even remember the guy's name, is some generic dark mage. He's like, hey, are you sure that you're up to handle this? What does he say? I heard her paladin withstood General Valter's lance, which is like they're talking about Seth. Like, that's so cool. Like, he's a legend, man. Seth is so fucking cool in this game. Everyone talks about how cool he is, and it's sick. But the guy says yeah, and so Reeve leaves. I don't know why Reeve doesn't just like. Well, he does explicitly say why he doesn't stick around. It's because he has like more important things to do, basically. Even though this should be like near the top of his priority list, but I guess not. Whatever. Who am I to judge? So Reeve leaves, and the guy approaches Eirika as she passes through, and basically demands her bracelet, which is significant because it shows that Grotto knows about the bracelet. The Grotto knows about why the bracelet is important, and wants to take it from Eirika. Who at this point, Eirika still doesn't even know what's up with the bracelet. But she says no, obviously. But then so the guy drops a whole bunch of shit on her at once. So I got to make sure I go through this one at a time. First of all, he says that Ephraim has been captured. Ephraim has been taken hostage by the Grotto Empire, and is being held in one of the cells in Renval. Which of course Eirika, pushes back on. She's like, that can't be true, but she doesn't know for sure, of course. But then, since Eirika still won't give up the bracelet, he decides that he's going to take drastic measures, and brings out a child who he has taken as a hostage, and threatens her in order to get Eirika to give her bracelet, which she does do. She does hand over the bracelet, and then basically he demands that they hand over all their weapons and surrender, which they refuse to do. And so he decides that he played this game long enough. He was never actually going to give them anything that they wanted. So he takes the girl and is saying that he's going to feed her to a giant spider that's prowling around the area. And Eirika has a hard-ass monologue in this section that I want to read. I was going to try to summarize it or give the synopsis, but honestly, I could not do it justice compared to what the words that are actually written down. So let me just read it word for word for you guys. Okay, so what she says is, "We, the people of Rene, have long honored our allegiance with the Grotto Empire, and you invaded without warning. You ravaged our land. You killed my father. Even then, I told myself I must not hate Grotto or her people. If I gave in to my hate, the bond between our lands would be lost forever. I refused to hate. Instead, I lived for the day our nations would know peace again. But if this is Grotto's true face, if you could extinguish Rene without pity, without remorse, if this is the case, then there is no room in my heart for forgiveness." Which is just like, that's fucking rad. I really like Eirika in this moment. This idea that she's been clinging on to hope this whole time, that, at the end of the day, it's only certain people who need to be stopped, and then from then on, Grotto and Rene will be able to, be peaceful together again. Realizing that, considering how many evil people that they've come across, the game doesn't bring specific attention to many of them, but, they do mention, the characters in the villages and stuff like that mention how much of a piece of shit Sar is from the previous chapter, from chapter 5, and how he was, particularly cruel to the people of Rene, as opposed to the people of Grotto who live there. And then consistently, she's seen how little interest the people of, or the soldiers of Grotto have for keeping the peace. And just watching her entire country be ravaged by bandits. So she's kind of at her wit's end. But it's this moment when someone from Grotto literally, basically is going to murder a child in front of her, where she's like, I cannot forgive you people if this is really what you've been like the whole time. Overall, I just think that this is a really cool moment for Eirika, and I want to start drawing particular attention to those. I have been the whole game, obviously, but I'm gonna miss them because the game is starting to do her pretty dirty in a few ways that I'm not a particularly big fan of, as we'll see in the next couple of chapters. But overall, I like this moment for her a lot, and I think it's one of the better ones that I think it's the best one that she's gotten in the game up to this point. I don't remember too much about her arc in later chapters, but we'll see if that still holds true. So this is where the chapter begins. The guy brings the girl over to a group of 3 hostages. Actually, I don't really know why there's 3 of them. You have to save all 3 of them in order to get the reward from this chapter. So mechanically, it wouldn't make a difference if it was just her, or if there was the group of all 3 of them together, or 2 of them, or a million of them. Who cares? It doesn't matter. But you do have to save all of them if you want the reward you get from this chapter, which I'll talk about in a moment. So this is a Fog of War map, and guys, maybe I'm going a little bit crazy, but I actually think this map is kind of good. I really like how the map progresses over the course of your experience with it, because there's a few different ways to go, right? You can go down, you can go up and around some mountains, or you can go through the middle. Now, the middle path is not ideal because it's filled with trees, which makes it hard for your units to navigate around. But it is obviously, first of all, the most direct way to get to the boss, the fastest way to get to the boss. And there's also a fort right at the center of the map, which it can be fun to try to fight with the enemies over who gets to use that fort. Now, if you want to take that fort for yourself, then that's fine, and it gives you a good defense buff. However, you are going to be in the middle of a lot of enemies that can attack you, so it might not be worth it. It might, put you at more risk than it helps you. So it's a little bit of there's like a tug of war in this map, right, where you push a little bit, and then you get pushed back a little bit as you have to retreat into the trees. You have to push forward a little bit. Now, if you're using Seth, now that kind of does get thrown out the window because he can just handle all the enemies. There is one enemy here that I really, really like. It might be my favorite generic enemy placement in the entire series, which might sound hyperbolic, and maybe it is. Maybe there's another one later on that I'm forgetting about that I like more. But I really, really like this guy. So in the fog, and this only really works because it's a Fog of War chapter. And in a chapter where you could actually like look at the inventories of all the enemies, it doesn't actually make much of a difference. You could just play around it. But because it's a Fog of War map, you can get jump scared by a fighter who pops out of the fog and is wielding a halberd, which is an axe that is super effective against cavalry. And this is notable because it is possibly the only enemy in the entire first half of the game who can do meaningful damage to Seth. If Seth is wielding a lance, then this guy will have weapon triangle advantage and will not only do a little bit more damage, but will also have pretty decent chance of hitting Seth. So it is like possible that your Seth could die here. It doesn't for me anymore now that I know this guy is here, but I have had a few runs where I get jump scared by this guy. What's nice about this also is that not only is it a built-in Seth counter for this map, but it is also a side objective, because if you can manage to kill this guy without having him switch over to his halberd, then he drops the halberd. If he does use his halberd, like if he attacks Seth and Seth kills him, then he just drops his plain old iron axe, which isn't that interesting. But if you can get him to, if you can either kill him before he has a chance to attack anybody, or if you have him attack somebody who's not mounted, he'll probably use his iron axe instead, and then the halberd will drop, which is pretty nice because halberds are pretty good in this game. I did want to mention something. There's something about paladins in this game that I did forget to talk about when I was talking about Seth and about Franz and Kyle and Ford. So paladins in the previous two Fire Emblem games, FE6 and FE7, could use all three weapons on the weapon triangle. They could use swords, lances, and axes. In this game, they were nerfed slightly so that they only use swords and lances. They do not have full weapon triangle control anymore. It's still not enough to make them like not the best class in the game, I would argue, except maybe Wyvern Knight. But I think Paladin is a strong contender for the best class in the game. But it is something, it's a little bit less overpowered, that they can just switch to whatever weapon they need in any given situation. But obviously, it doesn't actually make a meaningful difference in how good they are for the most part. There is also an anti-turtling incentive in this map, which is good because it encourages you to push forward in the fog a little bit. I do really like this map, and I think it has a lot of stuff in common with Fog of War maps that I don't like. The difference is that this map is like pretty easy for the most part. Like the difficulty comes from weighing like whether you want to push forward against the unknown versus whether you want to like take it slow and risk losing the side objective. And that's like an interesting dynamic, but it's counterbalanced and made a little bit less frustrating by the fact that the enemies aren't actually that strong. It's not like a situation like in Arcadia where one wrong move, you overextend a little bit with a squishy unit, and suddenly a fucking Wyvern Lord comes out of like 10 squares away and fucking kills him. You don't really have to worry about that with anybody except, I guess, Franz, because the halberd fighter does do, probably one-shots Franz. If he does a decent amount of damage to Seth, he's probably one-shotting Franz. So other than him, for the most part, you have to get hit by, like, a lot of enemies to be in danger of dying here. So as long as you're, like, pretty safe, you don't, you are able to extend a little bit past, take risks and be a little bit aggressive, and you don't get immediately kicked in the nuts for doing it, which I think is good. Like, and I think that the fog actually contributes to making this map a little bit more interesting than it would be otherwise. Although I do still think that the fog probably, other than the halberd fighter, I don't think the fog adds that much. I think it just kind of I think there's enough. The enemy density is high enough, and the section of the map in the middle with all these trees in the fort is interesting enough to carry it without the Fog of War. I don't think the halberd fighter would be as interesting if it weren't for the Fog of War. But I don't know if that's enough of a reason to include the fog. I really don't. So I'm not saying that I love this map or anything. I don't think it's like the best map in this game by any means. But I just think it's a fun little, idea. And I think it might be like one of my favorite Fog of War. It's probably like as of right now in terms of the games that we've played, it is probably my favorite Fog of War map in the series up to this point, which isn't saying a lot. But I don't actively hate it like I do with most Fog of War maps. But the anti-turtling incentive is that a few turns into the map, I don't remember exactly how many it is. It's a pretty generous time limit, which makes sense, considering it's still a pretty early game map that we're talking about here. But after a while, a spider will show up, and you have a few turns. This is nice too, because you have a few turns to react once you see the spider, because it's coming out of the fog, right? But then because it's on some peaks, every time it wants to move, it uses one space for its entire turn, or it uses its entire turn to move one space rather. So once you actually see it, you're able to realize that you need to get there quickly if you can. The way I chose to play this map is that I had Vanessa go down and around. There's also a village here, but it gives you an antitoxin, so it's terrible and not worth your time to visit. I had Vanessa go down and around and basically fight the spider for a couple turns to give me a couple of extra turns just to clear the map, which I don't think you need to do under normal circumstances. This is a kill boss map rather than route, so you all you have to do is get to the boss, kill them, which you can do with Seth usually within a few turns. So like under most circumstances, this map is like pitifully easy. But I think in situations where you're benching Seth, I think that this is actually like a really fun map because you might need to buy yourself a little bit of extra time just to make sure you can safely get to the boss. I don't know. I guess it depends on who you're using. My Vanessa was also like pretty low level, so she couldn't fight the spider one-on-one and win. But most of the time she probably can if you've been giving her like a decent amount of levels, which is pretty nice. I think it would be pretty fun to do that, and then you don't have anything to worry about at all. Oh, there's a fun little, I guess you would call it a bug. I guess it's a bug. So I think the NPCs have dialogue here. When the spider first comes out of the fog, they're like, please help us, or whatever, something like that. And then as it gets closer, they have a couple more lines that they say. And I think they're scripted to do it based not on the turn, but on the space that the spider is at. Because what I did was I parked Vanessa in front of the spider, so the spider, instead of moving, attacked her. And ended in the same spot. And then the NPCs repeated the same dialogue from the previous turn that I had just gotten. So I think that's pretty funny. You could theoretically, if you just had enough healing items for Vanessa, you could have them repeat that dialogue over and over again. I think. I'm not really sure, actually. Maybe they just say it again normally, as the spider is getting close to them. I'm not 100% sure. It was just conspicuously the exact same line, so I figured it had something to do with that. I ended the map immediately after that, so I didn't get to see if it repeated a third time. Oh, there is one thing that I don't like about this map, and that is that Cavalier reinforcements come out from behind you, from behind your starting position, and by that point, they're going to be in the fog. You're probably not going to have anyone back there to see them with, and I mean, even if you do, there's a chance that they just like roll up and kill your squishier units you've been trying to keep safe on the back lines. So I don't like that at all. I think that's pretty shitty. But it does, if there weren't fog here, I think that would be kind of cool, because then you would have to suddenly, freak out about like what to do next. They aren't same turn reinforcements. They don't have ambush spawns in this game, so you would have a turn to react to the enemy showing up. But of course, because they're in the fog, you probably aren't going to see them in time to do anything about them. Because if you can see them through the fog, then that means that you're close enough to where you probably won't be able to get away. Because they're cavaliers, like they have really high movement. So if you save all of the NPCs, then you're given an Orion's Bolt at the end of the chapter. Which is really funny, because the only character in the entire game who can use an Orion's Bolt is Nami, who's terrible. But under normal circumstances, if you aren't using Nami, then it's at the very least good to sell. You can get some money for it, which is nice. And because Seth is now realizing that Grotto knows about the bracelet, he thinks it's time to tell Eirika the truth about why they're so important. So essentially, the sacred stones, as we learned about last chapter, the Grotto seems to be after the sacred stones. And the sacred stone of Rene has been sealed away in a secret chamber underneath the castle that can only be opened by using both bracelets. So they need the bracelets from both Eirika and Ephraim to open the seal on the lock and get into the chamber where the sacred stone is. So there's concern being raised about, now that Eirika knows the truth about everything, she realizes that they really only care about the bracelets. And so if they already took Ephraim's, then there's a good chance that he's either already dead or they're going to execute him when they hear that Eirika is getting close to Renval. So they need to hurry their asses up and get to him as quickly as possible. And that's how the chapter ends. Pretty good one, I would say. Actually, I think this might be my favorite so far, possibly. I'm not sure. We'll have to see. We'll get to the map gauntlet eventually anyway. Okay, so next up we have Chapter 7, which is called Waterside Renval. So, after several chapters of making our way here, we have finally made it to Renval, which is where Ephraim is supposedly being held captive. So we gotta break through and get in. Both the opening narration and Seth in the opening cutscene of the chapter make a big deal about how Renval is sort of this natural fortress. It's surrounded on all sides by water, and the only way to get in is via a bridge that's very heavily guarded, and so it's going to take a lot of effort to get in. And I think that this is cool that they keep making this point. I'm going to bring this up a little bit later as we talk about some of the stuff that happens in Chapter 8, but I do think it's awesome how they are really hammering in that like breaking into this place is going to be quite an accomplishment, if they're able to pull it off. There is a moment here that I really like. I've mentioned this a couple of times. I think in FE6 they started doing this, possibly FE7, but I'm pretty sure it was FE6, so in those games, this only happens in the final chapter, and it happens in the final chapter in this game too. However, there are a couple of games where in an earlier chapter, every single one of your units that you have access to will chime in with a little snippet of dialogue to sort of like help you reflect on the journey that we've had along the way here. Ross has something to say, Garcia has something to say, Lute, Artur, Vanessa, Mulder, Gilliam, everybody has a comment to make here. Coleman, Namie, I forgot about them as well. Joshua and Natasha, I think that's it. I think that's everybody. So all of them have a quick little snippet of dialogue here, assuming they're alive, which I just think is nice. I think that I especially like when they do this in the final chapters, just because it makes you feel like, your team has like a role to play. It's not just, they're not just, blocks of stats. They actually have like meaningful things to contribute. It's very rare that side characters get to contribute to the story past their introduction chapter. So I really like it, even if it's just through small moments like these where it gets to feel like everybody has something to contribute. And that's where we start actually playing the chapter. Now, the way this map is laid out is really cool. So essentially, we need to get to the castle Renval at the center of the map. And to get there, we have to circle around some mountains and come up over a bridge across a river. And we can circle back towards the middle and then go up on the final stretch to the castle. However, if you have people capable of crossing rivers and mountains, then you can essentially take a shortcut. One of the easiest strategies, I guess, to implement is to just pick Seth up with Vanessa and then drop him off in the middle, which is a little bit anticlimactic. I didn't do that this time, obviously, because I'm not using Seth. I did do that, though, with Garcia. Once I cleared out some of the enemies that would pose a particularly big threat to him, like the mages, I baited those guys to the right, and then had Garcia like come in through, come in across the river and attack them from behind, which allowed me to clear out the enemies a little bit more quickly. This is why, incidentally, people enjoy using Pirate Ross, because he contributes to, I think, a faster turn, a faster clear here in an LTC run. Even if you're playing casually, it can be nice to have that option to cross the river with him if you want to, although I guess you could also theoretically just pick him up. But that's one less thing that Vanessa has to do in a map where she's very useful, because there's a lot of heavy usage of terrain here. There's also some ballista that you need to take care of if you want to get across the bridge safely. One of them is near your starting position that you can send somebody up. I believe I did it with Joshua this time around. And then there's one over on the top right corner that you kind of have to go out of your way to get. But if you do, then that'll make your approach to Castle Renval a little bit easier. It's pretty simple. It's not particularly difficult, but I definitely think that this is the most interesting map so far in terms of layout, because there's multiple different ways to approach it. There's multiple side objectives that are not, most of them aren't like, the side objectives in this case aren't about like getting treasure or about recruiting characters. It's about like tackling different parts of the map different parts of the enemy structure here that force you to approach the map in a more diverse way. Split your team up. Think about how you're going to how to make things easier on yourself. Or you could just march in a straight line and hope that you don't get hit by the ballista if that's what you want to do. That's a little bit boring in my opinion, but you can do it if you want to. There is a stealable energy ring here from one of the mages, so make sure you grab that with Calm if you remember. Energy ring is pretty good. It's one of the better stat boosters in the game, I would argue. Second only probably to the speed wing. So definitely get your hands on that if you're able to. Calm should have no problem stealing it. I'm pretty sure he's faster than the mage at base, even on hard mode. He should be. I would be very surprised if he wasn't. I guess I should probably double check. Let me do that. Yeah, so Calm has 10 speed at base, and the mage, I believe, on hard mode can have a maximum of 8 speed. So he will always be fast enough to steal this ring at base, which is pretty good. And then, of course, if you've been training Calm at all, he'll have enough speed to do that as well, for sure, cleanly, without a difficulty. That's pretty much all I have to say. I feel like I don't know what it is. I think that like this map is hard. The reasons that I like this map are hard to put into words. It's a pretty straightforward map to actually like describe. Your actual goal here is pretty simple. There aren't a lot of bells and whistles in terms of what's going on. But like if you actually sit down and play it and like approach it from the way that the game clearly wants you to, like taking advantage of the terrain or circumventing the terrain to try to make your life easier. It's a really interesting way to approach this map, and I think that it's fantastic. I think it is definitely one of the better maps probably in the entire game, despite its simplicity. You know, I think like being hard would help it. You know, I think if the enemies were a little bit stronger and forced you to approach the map with a little bit more caution, I think that would probably be preferable. But even considering how easy it is, I think that it encourages you to think about how you're actually going to handle the objectives, which is always a bonus in my book. Or, I mean, maybe not even a bonus. That I think that's just kind of how you make a good map in Fire Emblem. Challenge your players to think. It's just that simple. Too few maps do that these days, I feel like, or even back in the old days. Okay, we get to the end of this map. Oh, the boss drops a Night Crest, which is good. This is the only one that we're gonna get for a while, if I'm not mistaken. So you got to decide who you're gonna use it on. You have 4 options, and you have 3 good options in Franz, Kyle, and Ford, depending on who you have been training, who you want to give the Night Crest to. As I've said, I am using Ford out of those 3. I'm not using Kyle or Franz. If you're using more than one, or God forbid, if you're using Gilliam, then you might need to hold off on promoting one of them until you get a second Night Crest. So after you successfully capture the castle, you are met by Orson. Orson comes out of the castle and says, "Thank goodness you're here. Ephraim is inside. I barely managed to get out. I managed to slip away while the guards were distracted. I'm very happy you're here. Let's go save Ephraim." And everyone's like, "Okay, cool, awesome, let's go do that." And then the chapter ends there, and you save. You make your save for the next chapter. And you immediately see that the next chapter is called "It's a Trap." So. You probably have a pretty good idea of what's coming next, but assuming you don't pay attention to the chapter name, I guess you might be a little bit surprised by, and if you didn't listen to the last episode of the podcast, you might be a little bit surprised as to what's about to happen. So at this point, we do get the reveal that Orson is the traitor. They're headed inside the castle, and Orson's kind of trying to talk a little bit. He's being, like, not pushy about it, but he does say, like, hey, you should give the bracelet to either me, maybe me. You could do me if you wanted to, or you could give it to Seth, but you could also give it to me. He's not being that obvious about it, but he definitely, he's trying to get her to give up the bracelet in some capacity. And he says something to the effect of, Renee's sacred stone needs to be kept safe under all circumstances or whatever. And Seth approaches him and says, "Orson, there's some stuff here that just does not add up. First of all, why would you leave in the middle? Like, why would you leave Ephraim behind? If you managed to get out, why would you, like, not go back and try to help Ephraim? Also, it's a little bit confusing why there were no reinforcements from inside the castle during that fight. You would think that if there were a bunch of people in here, they would come out and help us, or they would come out and help the grotto soldiers defend the castle. Third of all, how do you even know about the sacred stones being connected to the bracelets? Like, that was never told to anybody as far as I know except me. Not even Eirika and Ephraim knew that. And then, of course, the big reveal is that it turns out that Orson had a dagger hidden in his, or a sword maybe, hidden in some part of his attire. So Seth reveals, like, hey, I know something's up. Hand over your weapons. And Orson plays his hand. He says, oh, well, I was hoping to keep the ruse up a little bit longer. And he reveals his hand as the traitor. He doesn't actually do anything here. Instead, the local grotto soldiers, Tirado, actually, who we met back in chapter 5X, he shows up and basically dismisses Orson. And Orson doesn't give like a lot of indication about why he did what he did. They do ask, but he does. The only real indication that he gives is that he gets to see his beloved again or something like that, but doesn't give a whole lot of details as to what that refers to. So he goes off and is not present again for the rest of the chapter. So Tirado is here now, and he's talking to Eirika, asks about the bracelet. You know, they're trying to get the bracelet off of her. Seth steps in to try to help her. And this is where I already mentioned this line, but I wrote it down verbatim because this is such a cool line, and I wanted to repeat it. Tirado says, basically he recognizes him as General Seth, you know, like a well-known Rene soldier. And he says, I thought to catch a little bird in my net, and it seems instead I've snared a hawk, which is so awesome. He's so fucking cool. I love the way that this game treats Seth. I think he's hyped up in a way that like Marcus never was, Avel never was. These other guys, like the story doesn't like pay them that same amount of lip service of like, man, these guys are like really cool and strong. And that's reflected in gameplay. You know, this is like as silly as Seth is, as much as I think it's a little bit ridiculous that he's so much stronger than the rest of your team, I do think it works narratively. You know, they integrate the narrative and the gameplay really well here, even if it comes at the cost of, you know, most characters being like interesting or fun to train or useful in the long term. That's not entirely true. There are still characters that are useful to train in the long term. It's just like Seth just does so much on his own, you know, that it feels a little bit pointless to train anything more than like people that can help facilitate Seth killing enemies. So it turns out that, and Tirado reveals here that the entire thing about Ephraim being captured was just a lie. Ephraim did manage to escape with his little Hail Mary at the end of 5X, and he's been on the run this whole time. However, even though Tirado was upset by this setback, he decided that he could twist it to his advantage. He spread rumors that he had captured Ephraim and figured that Eirika would hear them and rushed to his aid, which is exactly, of course, what happened. And now, you know, he says, all right, we've got you right where we want you. Let's kill you. And that's where the map begins. And I'm holding back. I've been kind of alluding to some stuff I want to say about this. I'm going to hold it back until we get a couple of turns into the chapter. However, I have feelings about this whole plot twist with Ephraim, but we'll get to that. So basically the goal here is to, we can't go out. He destroys the bridge behind us, so we can't escape. The only thing that we can do is press forward and try to capture Renval, essentially. And right now, they are actually earnestly trying to defend it, unlike with Ephraim, where they were purposefully letting him capture it as part of their bait and switch. They are now earnestly trying to defend the castle, so Eirika has to do what Ephraim thought he was doing a few chapters ago, and take over Renval. And it's pretty cool. I like this map. There are two ways to go. You can split off to the left, which takes you down a hallway. And then you can go up and around. There's a treasure room, and then there's a breakable wall. You can also go up to another treasure room. There's some armor knights in there, and then go down. Either way, both paths converge into the center throne room. There's not really initially any incentive to move your characters to the left. However, very early, we are given that incentive in the form of Ephraim. Ephraim shows back up in this map, and he shows up along with Ford and Kyle, and he is in the bottom left corner. So you have a couple of choices here. In fact, they actually highlight that in the text when Ephraim shows up. They talk a little bit about how you now have a couple of options. You can either have the two armies converge, you can have Ephraim, Kyle, and Ford meet up with the rest of your group, or you can crush the enemy between you, as Ford puts it, and have Ephraim's group go one way and have Eirika's group go another way. What I usually do is I'll split off a couple of characters, like Eirika, maybe Seth, a couple of guys will go down the left hallway to meet up with Ephraim, and then a handful will push forward upwards and capture that chest room, and make their way towards the center room that way. That is how I typically play this map. That is how I played that map this time, because there are some good items here. The items in the chests are very, very good. I will highlight that now. There is an Elysian whip, there is a silver sword, and there is an angelic robe. So all of those items are really useful, and you do have to be a little bit quick because there are thieves that will come. I think it might just be one, but there's one thief that will come and try to steal your shit. This chapter, honestly, isn't super easy. There are some mage reinforcements that hit pretty hard, especially on, some of your characters with lower res. So this isn't, the easiest chapter in the world. There are some enemies that do, a pretty substantial amount of damage. But overall, it's not too bad. There are a number of talk conversations that you can get by having various characters talk with each other. I believe Ephraim has a conversation with Eirika and Seth. And then Ford has a conversation with Franz, because Franz and Ford are brothers. I don't think Kyle has a conversation with anybody, unfortunately. Maybe they have. Yeah, let me check, actually. Let me see if there's any more that I don't know about. Okay, so there is actually one that I forgot to get, which was Seth and Kyle have a conversation. Let me just read that real quick and see if it's anything interesting. Most of them aren't very interesting. The Ford and Franz one is pretty funny, and you can go read that for yourself if you want to. It's just it's just funny because Franz makes a big deal about looking up to Seth, but doesn't really seem to look up to his brother as much. So they have a little bit of an awkward moment about that. The Seth and Kyle one I just read, it's not that interesting. It's fine. It's whatever. The Eirika and Ephraim conversation. I mean, first of all, it's very heartwarming. I don't want to take that away from this chapter. I think Eirika and Ephraim finally reuniting after the story hyping up their relationship for this many chapters. I think it's great. I really enjoy seeing them together. I think they have great interactions. Unfortunately, we are going to have to make the choice soon about which one of them is going to be the main protagonist. So they're not going to get to interact for too much of the story past this point until they reconvene about 2/3 of the way through the game, which is a little bit of a shame. But this is one of the few times where we get to see them together, and it's really nice. I like that a lot. Now, the actual conversation that they have here is... So basically, Eirika says, oh, thanks for coming to save me. Ironically, I was coming to save you. And then Ephraim says, oh, well, I was about to go fight Emperor Vigard himself, but when I heard that you were in trouble, I turned around and came back. And Eirika's like, oh, no, I didn't, I'm sorry that I screwed up your plans. And Ephraim's like, oh, no, don't worry about it. The fact that you're here gives me inspiration or something like that. It's a nice moment, I do think that, it's pretty explicit, and this is fine for them to fill this role narratively. It's pretty explicit that Eirika is not as strong martially as Ephraim is, and that's fine. And so her strength coming from her ability to inspire others, maybe being a little bit more mentally capable, which is something that's fairly consistent, I guess, if you want to argue that. I think that's a fine dynamic for them to have. However, what I don't like, and what absolutely should not have been the case, is Ephraim should not have escaped at the end of 5X. Ephraim should have been captured. Ephraim should have needed to be saved by Eirika. This entire section of the game, Eirika's been talking about how badly she wants to help her brother, and it feels like the story just really undermines that by saying, well, he was fine, actually, and in fact, if anything, Eirika... put herself in danger, which required Ephraim to come save her. And it was just so unnecessary, right? They had the setup that they needed for a proper, for that story to be executed well. And I just, it was so unnecessary. They want to make Ephraim, this cool badass, and he is. And they absolutely could still do that. there's various ways that Ephraim is a cool badass throughout this game. This did not need to be one of them. This did not need to be a, Ephraim just, single-handedly, escaped from Volter and Tirado and everybody, everybody else who was fucking, attacking them at the end of 5X. They were completely surrounded. And Orson also betrayed them. Like, every advantage, they had every disadvantage going against them, and they still managed to do it. I don't know. I'm not big on it. I don't like the way that this part of the story is handled. And I love Ephraim. Ephraim is one of my favorite lords in the series. It's just I feel like they do Eirika so dirty in this section. This is her chance to have like one really good moment, and it's just All right, I'm not gonna harp on it too much. But it's just something that I'm not a fan of when it comes to this game. Now, here's what I will say. And you can argue that this is headcanon. You can argue that this is cope. You can argue whatever you want to argue, okay? But here's my agenda. I am agenda posting. My agenda is that Eirika did actually save Ephraim. And I didn't really think about this until this playthrough. But I really do think that this is true. Eirika talks to Ephraim, and Ephraim says, I was about to go to fight Emperor Vigard in his castle, and then I turned around when I heard you were in trouble. What would have happened if Ephraim went to go do that? What would have happened? He would have fucking lost, and I will not hear arguments otherwise. I mean, you're welcome to if you want to, but I will not hear arguments otherwise. So we do eventually, to spoil a little bit of later parts of the game, we do eventually go fight Vigard in his castle, and it is a hard-ass fucking chapter. Even if you don't want to take the game mechanics as literal, even if you don't want to say, well, Ephraim wouldn't have been able to do it at his level or whatever, like, if you don't think that that's a reasonable argument, that's fine. But, like, you need a whole army, to back you up for that fight. And yes, Ephraim does do it off screen if you choose Eirika route, without any of the rest of his squad there. All of the characters go with Eirika, so Ephraim's squad is not there. However, he also has the entire Freljord military backing him up. Like, that is the argument that is made for why everybody can go with Eirika. Everyone's going with Ephraim to make this a reality. So tell me, do you really think that Ephraim, Kyle, and Ford could have barged into the castle and won, or at the very least, like, escaped successfully? Maybe the answer is yes. If they had actually written that out, the answer probably would have been yes. But I think that's bullshit. I absolutely think that if we're looking at this realistically and not just, like, jerking Ephraim off, he absolutely would have, like, lost there. He might have died there. And so Eirika showing up and necessitating him turning around and not going through with that stupid bullshit plan, I think that counts as her saving him, okay? And you will not take this from me. I need Eirika to get one W. She needs one W. And this is it as far as I'm concerned. I will die on this hill. Anyway, unhinged, deranged rant aside, I don't even remember what the fuck I was talking about. Oh, yeah, so I talk about the chests, I talk about the thieves. Yeah, and then you progress through the center of the map, and you kill Torado, and that's it. It's a seize map, so you have to capture with Eirika. If you choose Ephraim route, this will be the last map that Eirika has to seize on. It'll be the last map that she's considered the main lord for. But yeah, I like this map. I like the way it's structured overall. I think the incentive to split your army is pretty good. I like the way that the two paths converge at the end. I think it's, like, appropriately challenging for, like, the last bit of the first leg of this game, I think you could argue. So yeah, I enjoy it. I think it's a pretty fun map overall. Okay, so they successfully capture the castle. I don't know. Walter was so invested in Ephraim, in, like, capturing Ephraim before. I don't know where the fuck he is. But they are able to defeat Torado and get away. Before they leave, it turns out that Ephraim has been traveling with a young girl with indigo hair, which, if you remember, indigo hair was brought up before by... we didn't know who it was at the time. I guess we still don't. But earlier we encountered a man who asked about a girl with indigo hair. Eventually we will find out that his name is Sala, and that this girl's name is Myrrh. In fact, actually, I think he might mention that her name is Myrrh here. So we don't know anything about who she is. We don't know anything about why she's here, why Ephraim is traveling with her, anything like that. But she just says that it's time to go because there's a large group of enemies approaching. Ephraim seems to imply that these are monsters. He describes them as otherworldly help or something like that. Otherworldly soldiers, something to that effect. So it seems like we're about to get attacked by a giant group of monsters. And so Ephraim decides that it's time to bail, and they all get out of there. And that's where the chapter ends. Now, this is where I would normally talk about the route split. I thought that's what I was going to be doing at the end of this episode, was talking about the route split. However, I want to save that for the beginning of next episode, because there is some story content between the end of chapter 8 and when you actually make your choice in the route split, and I think that it would be good to start on that this time around rather than ending on it here. So that's all we're going to talk about today for FE8. I'm going to play those next few chapters, and we're going to talk about the route split next time. In terms of our map gauntlet, which was the best map that we played today? Now that's actually a really interesting question, because I don't know. I mean, I think all of the maps we've played today were pretty good. I don't think any of them were amazing, but I also think that they were all pretty enjoyable, including the Fog of War map, which is really weird. I think that all of the maps this episode were just structured in really fun and interesting ways. They all had interesting anti-turtling incentives. Well, I guess Waterside Renval didn't have anti-turtling incentives, but the map was interesting enough to play fast, where I felt like I was incentivized to do so just because it was more fun. And I didn't really need, I didn't need the threat of losing a promotion item, or a stat booster to get me to want to play fast in that map. It was fun to use Vanessa to cheat the game's terrain, essentially. That's just always a fun feeling. I think I might go with, oh man, this is tough. I don't think it's chapter 8. I think chapter 8 is a little bit of a slog towards the middle. I think, when it's just like progressing through the throne room, I think it's a little bit on the boring side. Honestly, I feel like it's fucking opposite day. I think my favorite chapter of this episode might be the Fog of War map. I think it might be chapter 6, because I never felt like there was a dull moment in that chapter. I felt like the entire time there was this really fun push and pull between me and the enemies, where I was giving a little bit and extending a little bit, but then I had to pull back a little bit. It felt like there was this fight going on, and that there was no like, and part of that is because I fucking bench Seth. I get that part. And I also really like the halberd halberd fighter. I think that's such a fun little gotcha that they put in for people that are relying too heavily on Seth. I think that's a great funny little enemy placement there. I think if chapter 7 was a little bit on the more difficult side, I think it could have won out, because I think it's more engaging that way. But chapter 6 without using Seth is it's not very difficult, but it's a little bit more engaging, I think, than chapter 7. So I think I'm going to give it to chapter 6, and I actually, honestly, guys, I think that might be the best chapter in the game so far. I think I like it a little bit more than chapter 5. I think I like it a little bit more than chapter 4. And before that, it was just kind of a bunch of bullshit. This is the thing with this game, is that, there aren't that many maps that really, blow me away. There are a few that I think are really good, and there are a few that I definitely think are going to beat chapter 6. I think my prediction for what I'm going to end up liking most in this game is chapter 10 of Ephraim route. So that might dethrone it. There are a couple Ephraim route chapters that I like. There are a couple of Eirika route chapters that I like. And there's a couple after the route splits reconverge that I'm a fan of. But honestly, I thought for the most part, the chapters in this game aren't spectacular. They're good. Most of them are good. In fact, I think this might have the lowest number of maps that I dislike out of all the games that we've looked at so far. In fact, I think that's definitely the case. I guess we'll have to confirm as we get closer to the end. But I can't think of any maps in this game that I dislike outright. But there just aren't that many that are amazing either, is what I'm trying to say here. So don't be too surprised if there aren't a ton of maps that are yeah, this is amazing, this is one of my favorite maps in the series. I just don't think there are that many. Okay, yeah, I think that's everything. So leave your answer. Well, I guess in terms of what I've been doing, I've been playing a lot of Fire Emblem. I finished the Engage draft. Or it wasn't a draft. I finished the Awakening draft. I finished my Engage playthrough. I liked the game more than I did my first time around. Maybe I'll do like a quick blurb about my thoughts about it at some point. I don't know. I remember for a while I was promising to do an Engage episode when I finished my second playthrough, but the game obviously came out 2 years ago, so I don't know if anyone is still interested in seeing that. But possibly. In terms of what I've been seeing but what I've been watching and playing, there hasn't really been much to add on. I've been playing Radiant Dawn, because I need clear data for when we get to Radiant Dawn for the podcast. And I've just been replaying Radiant Dawn, to try to get myself, that clear data. So that's been fun. I like Radiant Dawn. So I'll definitely I'll mention that. I'll give updates about that as it goes along. Right now I'm at I'm Alencia's Gambit I'm about to do. So close to the end of part 2. Yeah, I think that's everything. So and I forgot about news. Let me see if there's any news real quick. There is none. I mean, in fairness, I've been doing this. I've been getting these episodes out in really quick succession. I'm recording this part actually on the day of that Nintendo Direct on not the Switch 2 one, the Switch one. March 27th is when I'm recording this. So we just got a Nintendo Direct and there was nothing Fire Emblem related in there whatsoever. No FE4 remake, no new game, nothing like that. Which is, hopefully we get something about that soon, but I guess we'll have to see. Switch 2 genealogy remake, absolutely 100% for sure this time, guys. Trust, believe, trust the process, believe in the process. We'll get there. Okay, make sure you guys let me know who you think is the worst unit in this game in terms of gameplay, by tweeting at I'm a Melee Kirby on Twitter and Blue Sky, or emailing turnwellpodcast@gmail.com. And I think that's everything. So have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.